Well, if you are one of the unfortunate passengers hoping for a train on Southern Railways over the next few weeks, do not despair. Just yet. While the row between Southern Railways and the trade unions continues, and the company will go to the Court of Appeal on Monday to try to stop strikes by drivers next week and in the new year, some passengers have been looking at rather more radical solutions. Antony Simm from the Reigate, Redhill and District Rail Users Association is one of those who's been looking into alternatives for his daily commute.
It was a random thought and a random idea last week. Lots of people were talking about alternatives to getting to work, particularly because of the train drivers' strike, which begins on Tuesday, because there'll be no trains at all. So people were talking about taxi pooling and getting buses and coaches. And I just sort of had this random idea about, is it even possible to try and charter a train, to kind of privately hire it, to run a journey that would get us to work, and then at the end of the day would bring us home again.
And how far have you got with the idea of chartering a train?
So after the initial thought, I did a little bit of searching on the internet, and I came across a company that does do exactly that, can charter trains. So just wondering whether it was even possible and whether we could make it happen. I got in touch with them last week, had a couple of really good conversations with them, and they were very keen to see if they could help.
And what did they say to you?
When I initially spoke to them, the big challenge was time. It's hard work to make these things happen quickly because there's lots of work involved to get a train to run. But they were going to go and have a look to see what was possible. Initially, they said they would do what they could to make it happen. They said that some interesting things about the trains that they can charter. So it's very expensive to do it. It would have worked out around about £50, £60 for a return trip from Redhill to London Victoria, for example. The trains, when they run them, only have between 500 and 600 seats, and they're not allowed to have people standing on the trains when they run a train, which is astonishing considering the number of times I've been squashed onto a train standing up with hundreds of other commuters.
And why did they say to you that they couldn't help?
I mean, first off, the company was hugely helpful, and from my perspective, they did everything they could to try and make it happen. The big challenge being time, and also them being able to source a train, the actual locomotive and rolling stock, in order to make it happen in time for the driver's strike.
So it won't work out this time, but are you going to try again, or are you going to look at other possibilities?
I think for everybody, the immediate challenge is the train strikes next week. It's coming up to Christmas. Everybody's busy at work and wanting to spend time with their families in the evening. And it's just a huge shame that we can't obviously make something happen for next week. People are looking at alternatives like carpooling and taxis and coaches so they can actually get into work next week. If the strikes in January continue, I mean, I'd love to have another conversation with the train charter company to see if, with a bit more time, something else is possible. And obviously this story has spread quite far, so I'm sure I won't be the only people talking to them about trying to source a train from a charter company.
Antony Simm. I asked Simon Pierlot, the co-owner of the train chartering company, why it was that he couldn't oblige with the train to reduce the expected misery on the Southern Line next month.
There is a process to follow, and if the process is followed, it's relatively easy. And it really starts from, is there enough time to do it? Is it likely to be a journey that Network Rail would accept for planning? Does the client have enough money to run the train? Is there enough rolling stock? By that I mean, obviously, locomotive and carriages, because our trains are made up of locomotive and carriages separately. Is there the train crew to staff the train? And are the stations they want to travel to feasible stations in terms of the length of the train and busyness of the line?
And was it feasible at all to provide a train in time for next week for that particular route to take the place of the southern trains that will not be running?
Assuming that Network Rail would accept the train into planning, bearing in mind they generally like 12 weeks, but it was a safe assumption because this line would be empty of anything except freight, And assuming we can get rolling stock, it was a totally feasible journey, yes.
And was it feasible to find the train crew, the driver, for example?
Well, for that we rely on the company that provides the locomotive, which is known as a train operating company. They're the ones who provide the driver and the locomotives to pull the train of carriages.
And what did the plan to charter a train for this route founder on in this instance? What were you told by the train operating company?
They couldn't provide the locomotives and or drivers.
And they didn't specify, though, whether it was the locomotives they couldn't provide or the drivers that they couldn't provide?
No, and I didn't ask because in our busy lives, once it can't be done, it can't be done. and further analysis is pretty time-wasting. We simply tell the client, I'm sorry, on this occasion we can't fulfill.
Did the suspicion enter your mind that it could be down to the unions, to, say, ASLEF, for example, that drivers might feel reluctant to break a strike?
Well, I don't see this as a strike-breaking activity. The beef, if you like, is between the unions, as I understand it, and Southern. And it's not with the passengers, because, of course, the whole premise is, I understand, passenger safety. And so there's no advantage to Southern in us providing a charter train. And equally, of course, bear in mind, not to know, but our trains all have guards. We're required to have guards.
And what if the passengers, for example, from the Reigate Red Hill District Rail Users Association said, actually, we'd like to try and bypass Southern altogether and, in fact, hire our own trains permanently?
Okay, well, in that case, we then come against the inbuilt protection that rail franchisees have. We cannot compete with a scheduled service. But, in this case, of course, there are no Southern trains running, so we're not competing with them.
Company. We asked the train drivers' union, ASLEF, if it would permit drivers to work on a train organised by Southern passengers, and they told us it was a hypothetical situation. It's coming up to 5:20.